Hello and welcome back to my channel, What If Deku 2.0. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today, we're kicking off part 4 of our series, What If Deku Unleashed God-like powers and surpassed all? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is DripBayless from FanfictionNet. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. The rush into the narrow passageway was a hectic and chaotic mess of bodies violently pushing against each other to make any amount of ground. It became abundantly clear to many that their current situation was the first obstacle of the race, and Todoroki was the first to capitalize. Foregoing fighting through the mob, he instead created a path for himself by freezing the ground and the feet of the competition, allowing him to quickly overtake them and lead the pack. Many of his classmates, and even some that weren't, found ways around the ice with admittedly creative applications of their quirks. He hadn't considered that Bakugo could simulate flight via propulsion with his explosions, and he supposed that Yaoyorozu keeping herself off the ice with a bow staff was rather inspired, but he wasn't particularly worried. None of them would overtake him or even keep up with him down the stretch. Well, almost none of them. As if on cue, an unfortunately familiar bright yellow blur shot past him from above, and he turned an aggravated eye toward his classmate that landed a few meters in front of him. Midoriya glanced back at him with a slight turn of his head before he noticed a detached hand and forearm that was hanging onto his gym uniform. Todoroki was perplexed at the sight for a moment, and even Midoriya was momentarily taken aback at the development. But the two-toned teen shook it off and continued on his path to victory. Izuku, on the other hand, stopped to inspect the hanger-on until it quickly dawned on him. Sure enough, a floating head of green hair and a familiar grin flew to his location and circled around him. "Did you split your entire body to fly over the crowd?" Izuku asked with an amused and impressed smile. "Nah, wish I could've," she lightly denied. "Our uniforms aren't DNA-coded, so I'd have to get naked to split everything. I asked Tetsu to throw my body as hard as he could in front of everyone. Speaking of which..." Izuku spied her body in the air flailing towards the ground near him, and he scrambled to catch it to avoid it garnering any damage. Once he ensured her body was fine and set it back down, she quickly reassembled herself and flicked Izuku on the temple. "Sucker," she laughed before bounding ahead. Izuku could only mirthfully tusk and head after her and Todoroki alongside the rest of the participants that made it out of Todoroki's trap. He made it to the next obstacle in time to see Mineta bouncing on his sticky balls and leap for Todoroki to attack him, only for the overzealous boy to be smacked to the ground by a giant robot. Said giant robot was accompanied by many other giant robots, and the runners came to the realization that they were facing an army of robots from the entrance exam. Looks like they've encountered their next trial. A test of strength and cunning. It's a Robo Inferno. "So, this is what the other students faced in their entrance exams," Todoroki remarked. "They obviously went to a lot of trouble, but I wished they prepared something a little more difficult." He planted his quickly frosting right arm on the ground in front of him, quickly and violently freezing the ground under the approaching robots. "Especially since my dear, old dad is in attendance," he spat the last few words out with venom. With a swipe of his right arm, he sent a wave of ice and frigid air at the nearest robots, freezing them in their tracks and allowing him to dart through their legs. Many other students tried to follow, but he had intentionally frozen the giant robots while they were off balance, sending them careening to the ground in front of and potentially on top of the other participants. Izuku immediately went on high alert. What started off as a tough race between students with already questionable safety measures had just become a legitimately dangerous situation. "What a showing! Shoto Todoroki from Class 1 has pulled away with the lead. With both an offensive and defensive attack, no less. No wonder he got in through recommendation. He hadn't ever encountered the Robo Inferno before and still cleared it like it was nothing. "Why are you screaming?" Back on the track, the tumbling mass of frozen metal succumbed to gravity and made its way to the ground. Izuku flared his quirk once again while preparing to intercept it, and he pushed the emerald flames to the surface and coated his body with them to catch the robot. Unbeknownst to him, the outer limits of his fire shined a brilliant orange and flattened out around him and in front of the other runners to keep them out of harm's way. The green core within the sea of orange caught the falling mass of steel, and it was only then that he noticed two others on either side of him. Kirishima to his right had hardened his body and caught the falling monstrosity, while another boy to his left, Tetsu if he had to guess, covered his body in what appeared to be steel and caught the robot as well. With a collective heave, the three pushed the robot back and away from themselves and the others. "Damn it, Todoroki 1A, anyone other than me and Midoriya Light Bright would have been killed," came the simultaneous shouts of Kirishima and Tetsu on either side of him. Then they noticed each other, and they both growled in frustration. "How am I supposed to stand out beside a damn copycat?" Amazing! Class 1A's Midoriya pushes back the trap with an assist from his classmate Kirishima and 1B's Tetsu. He also protected the other students from potential danger, but I'm not sure he even realized that he did it. That's why he's already your favorite, huh? Watch your mouth. On the track, the orange flame barrier dispersed right as Izuku noticed that it was even up. "I don't need your damn protection," shouted a familiar, angry voice from above. He saw Bakugo sailing over him and the robots in hot pursuit of Todoroki, and he heard a few scattered murmurs that indicated the others were temporarily putting the competition aside to clear a path through the machines. Izuku was not going to be left in the dust, however. He shot a quick glance to the disappearing form of Bakugo in the air, and he sent a frown in the direction of Todoroki. With his mentor's words replaying in his mind once again, he went up in a bright, yellow flame and shot past the robots in quick succession, clearing the obstacles in the blink of an eye before bounding toward the next stage. For those of you who thought the first obstacle was easy, let's see how you feel about the second one. If they take a spill, they're out. If they want to pass this test, they'll have to get creative. It's the fall. Todoroki wasted no time sliding on the narrow ropes attaching each platform to another, whereas Bakugo continued blasting himself above the treacherous terrain entirely. Todoroki sent a quick look to Bakugo gaining on him. Then he looked around the area for any sign of his other troublesome opponent, but he couldn't find him. That put him on edge, as an unseen Midoriya could prove to be a dangerous one. Izuku, meanwhile, was bouncing from platform to platform, quickly making up any lost ground to Todoroki, but doing his best to stay out of his field of vision and move as quickly as possible. Now that he knew that the boy was not above large-scale sabotage, Izuku wanted to avoid any other potential ice mishaps that could get people hurt. In the process, though, he did get to catch a glimpse of a girl using pretty wicked support equipment to clear some of the drops. Her manic excitement almost rubbed off on him the more he watched. Adjacent to her was Ochako swiftly and almost professionally clearing a tightrope before launching into a somersault and split combo onto the platform that was familiar to him. Scarily familiar. "Oh my shit. Please tell me Mom didn't create a mini-me in only 2 weeks' time," he muttered to himself with his heart in the pits of his stomach. "Ah, Verdant, wasn't that your move?" Snipe hesitantly queried in the luxury box. The only response he received was an almost diabolical giggle from the woman while she slowly rubbed her hands in delight. It was very clear to every teacher and hero present that she was way too close with Principal Nezu. And now, we're finally approaching the last obstacle. Everyone better tread carefully. You're stepping onto a minefield. Todoroki slowly meandered through the path, taking great care to step around the many patches of dirt that looked the most unsettled. The reprieve was short, though, as Bakugo again forewent traveling by foot like a peasant in favor of staying airborne via explosions, and he was quickly gaining on him with a feral grin. "Don't you dare underestimate me, you icy hot bastard," he shouted before rocketing past him, sending a few explosions his way for his troubles. Todoroki responded in kind by trying to grab and freeze the boy's arm while keeping pace with him. The back-and-forth battle of wills continued until they felt a rumble behind them and turned to see what was approaching, and the sight of Izuku launching himself toward them filled them with alarm. Izuku was purposely grazing the landmines in his dash to propel him even faster, and he was coming in hot. It's a three-man free-for-all for first place. Todoroki and Bakugo were neck and neck in the lead and knocking on the finish line, and now Midoriya is inserting himself into the fray to take first place. Bakugo and Todoroki disregarded each other and turned their attention to Izuku, both readying a heavy attack of their own to halt his advance. Todoroki swung his right arm and Bakugo swung his left, the duo unleashing a wave of ice and a large explosion, respectively, and Izuku charged right into the attacks with a flash of red. The two teens watched in horror as he plowed through the violent duality in a crimson blaze of glory, carving through the ice like butter and shrugging off the explosion like a gentle breeze. The next few moments happened in slow motion for the three. Izuku glided past them, paying no attention to their wide-eyed stares while he planted his palms onto their craniums to use them as leverage to launch himself down the path and further ahead. It didn't occur to them until Izuku had become a bright yellow blur once more that he had used them as glorified launch pads, and it, predictably, went as well as one would expect. A loud, furious howl of rage and a subdued, equally furious growl followed after him, and the two booked it to catch up and steal first place back from the greenhead. Unfortunately, it was all for naught. Izuku Midoriya is our champion. Todoroki slid into the arena with Bakugo blasting himself inside half a second later, but Izuku was already there on his hands and knees amidst the cheers and confetti. He had his hand on his chest while he caught his breath, a light, pink glow on his palm to soothe the aching in his chest cavity. He had slightly overdone it with the yellow flames again, but Recovery Girl wasn't around to hit him for it, so he could rest easy. Bakugo grit his teeth. He was still behind them. Even though he was ever so slowly closing the distance, there was still distance. The missed heroics classes were beginning to add up, and that ate at him. He made his bed, however, and he'd just have to get himself and the bed even stronger while he was cleaning up his mess. He'll catch up to and surpass them soon enough. Todoroki was silently fuming. Seeing the boy go up in flames always made him incredibly uncomfortable, but the power and skill he wielded were almost beyond equal. It used to infuriate him to no end, and he wanted nothing more than to stomp out the upstart that was practically a facsimile of his father. However, things started to change after he overheard the conversation between Midoriya's apparent mother and Bakugo. It put a few things into perspective. He couldn't think about those things, though. He was going to defeat Midoriya using only his ice so that his father would finally understand the futility of his efforts to get him to embrace his left side. He wouldn't need his fire at all, especially if he could publicly take down a powerful fire quirk and prove his mother's quirk's superiority. "Huh, told you he'd win. Where's my money?" A heavily bandaged Tamura with his arm in a cast celebrated beside Kirigiri as the two watched the UA Sports Festival in one of the booths in their seedy bar. Kirigiri grumbled in annoyance and slid 800 yen across the table to his sorta boss and occasional ward. "Izuku, that was so awesome!" Ochako shouted when she arrived in the stadium and spotted her best friend. "I can't believe you got first place." It was nothing. He initially tried to shrug off the praise, but he quickly remembered what he saw during the race. "What exactly did my mom teach you?" A sly smile formed on Ochako's face. "Sorry, that's confidential. Sensei's orders." "She ordered you not to tell anyone?" Izuku questioned. "Just you," she replied with a playful glint in her eyes. The utterly nonplussed expression she received in return just made it all the more fun for her. Now that the top 42 have advanced, it's time for the real fun to begin, Midnight practically purred into the microphone. It's your chance to step into the limelight. Give it your best. The board began cycling through events once more with a crack of her whip. Let's see what we have in store for you next. Will your wildest fantasies come to light? What will it be? The waiting is torture. She's having way too much fun with this, were the simultaneous thoughts of Aizawa and Izuku. It's a cavalry battle, she announced. The participants will form teams of 2-4 people as they see fit. Each player has been assigned a point value based on the results from the obstacle course. The point values will go up in increments of 5, starting at 5 points for 42nd place, 10 points for 41st, and so on. Makes sense, so I should be worth 210 points since I came in first. And the point value assigned to the first place contestant is 10 million, Midnight announced with a wink to Izuku. Are you kidding with me? Right now, Izuku deadpanned. Is that an offer? Midnight quipped in a sultry tone. What was that? A furious Inko shouted from the crowd, and a fearful Midnight immediately put her hands up in surrender. Nothing, just banter, she quickly placated the angry mother. While she shook away the feeling of imminent doom, Izuku was dealing with the newfound attention and predatory gazes of 41 other competitors. It appeared that being worth 10 million points made him an easy target. Well, that just wouldn't do. Izuku activated his quirk, making a few steps back. He concentrated on separating the flames, and after a few moments, the colorful fire took on a deep blue hue. All activity around him halted, and Izuku started emanating a cold, haunting aura among the arena floor that he did his absolute best to keep from reaching the audience. The other contestants instantly felt something dark, something evil. It felt as if death itself was breathing down their necks and grinning maliciously over their shoulders. Make it a good show, Izuku challenged with a dark smirk, and several people could swear they saw an ethereal cat hovering over him with an even more frightening smile. Then it was gone. The flames dispersed and the oppressive dread vanished. That didn't mean that the discomfort that everyone was feeling left with it, though, as just about everyone was now giving Izuku a very wide berth. I may have made an error, the pale Shinso thought to himself. What the F, Deku? Bakugo unintentionally slipped into his old habit. Spooky, a silver-haired girl thought in interest. Fumi, did you see that? A very shaken dark shadow poked their head out to ask their companion. Midoriya truly does traverse the darkness alongside us, Tokoyami responded. Oh my god, you are such an MO, Dark Shadow lamented. They couldn't be certain if their host or anyone else had seen what they had seen. They'd keep a wary eye on Midoriya in the future. Midnight explained the rules of the cavalry battle and sent them on their way to select their teams. Izuku watched the contestants scatter and group up amongst themselves, steering clear of him out of a desire to beat him, a desire to not be a target, fear, or some combination of the three. He shrugged and started searching for Ochako. Meanwhile, an unresponsive Bakugo was being crowded by several of his classmates, all trying to make their case to be on his team. Yo, Bakugo, let's team up. It'll be just like back in Junior. Hi, Kirishima excitedly shouted. Right, a blast from the past, Mina exclaimed with her own excitement. It wasn't even that long ago. Raccoon eyes, shitty hair, Bakugo muttered. Damn it, I know that you know my name, Kirishima shot back. And my hair's not that different from yours. It's dyed and you use gel to spike it, Bakugo replied. He's gotcha there, Kiri, Mina consoled the now slumping teen. Fine, Bakugo finally assented. Kirishima bounced back with his sharp grin like nothing had happened. Hell yeah, let's kick some ass and get that 10 million. That brought out Bakugo's own signature feral grin. Back with Izuku, he and Ochako were busy developing a strategy that centered around just the two of them, as Ida turned down Izuku's offer to team up on the basis that he wanted to prove himself as well. Izuku was the man to beat, after all, and he understood that. They were brainstorming until the sound of rocket boosters became apparent. Perfect, you're still all alone. Enter the star, a manic voice began, drawing their attention. Izuku turned to inspect the new arrival and was immediately face to face with a pair of goggles with crosshairs on them. "Team up with me, person in first place," she exclaimed. "Holy hell, you are quick!" Izuku shouted and jumped back behind Ochako. "The name's Mei Hatsum, inventor extraordinaire in the support course and future head of Hatsum Industries," she proudly declared. "Oh, I remember," Ochako spoke up. "You're that weirdo from the obstacle course that used those cool gadgets." "Precisely," Mei agreed, either oblivious or uncaring of the negative connotation. "We haven't met, but I'd like to use your current fame to my personal advantage." "That's really straightforward," Izuku remarked with a chuckle. "Sure, I'm down. If I team up with you, then I'll be in the spotlight as part of the team that everyone is keeping their eyes on," Mei interrupted, slowly invading Izuku's space. "Right, yeah, I'm down," Izuku tried to reassure, but he was interrupted again. "That means my super cute babies will inevitably seen by the big COs tuning into the sports festival," she continued with her increasingly manic energy, getting right into Izuku's face. "Following that line of reasoning, teaming up with you would be the best avenue to showcase my babies and get recruited so I can use those connections as a jumping-off point to create my own support empire." "Hatsum!" Izuku shouted and grabbed a firm hold of her shoulders, freezing her in place for a brief moment at the contact while he looked her directly in her unique, yellow-green eyes with crosshair-shaped pupils just like her goggles. "You're good, no need to explain. Let's do this and get you that empire." Her smile increased in fervor at the sight of his own, and she opened the case of support equipment she was carrying with her. "I packed a ton of powerful babies with me, so I'm sure you'll find something you like among my arsenal." "That jetpack," Izuku examined the device. "Did you base it off of air jets?" "That I did. Isn't he awesome?" she responded, and the two devolved into a fanboying session for different pro-heroes that used impressive and intricate tech, as well as the tech itself and the devices that Mei had built. Ochako blankly watched on, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. It wasn't the time. She had a sports festival to win. Thankfully, she was brought out of her thoughts by a hand on her shoulder. A girl with black hair and blue eyes framing her stoic face hummed to her in agreement, consolation, solidarity, derision. Ochako really couldn't be sure. "Oh, Yui, what's up?" Izuku said when he noticed her arrival. "I figured Class 1B would try to stick together." A shrug and a noncommittal grunt was the only response, but he nodded in understanding nonetheless. "Izuku, who's this?" Ochako asked, curiously eyeing the new arrival. "Oh, this is Yui Kodai. She's in 1B. We met at the entrance exam," he explained. "Yui, this is Ochako Yororaka. She's the one I made the machai for." Ochako and Yui assessed each other, silently taking in the subtle similarities but brushing them off as coincidences. "Traitor!" Takage shouted to Yui as she stormed over with an embarrassed-looking Itsuka Kendo and blank-faced Ryaiko Yanagi in tow. "How could you betray us like this, Yui?" "Setsuna, please don't tell me that you've bought into Monama's anti-Wana SH stick," Kendo sighed with her head in her enlarged hand. "What? No," Takage denied before pointing at Izuku. "That's the filthy heathen that swears All Might could beat Godzilla." "Wait, really?" Kendo replied with a hint of disbelief in her tone. "Oh my god, we're not doing this today," Izuku huffed. "All Might would wipe the floor with Godzilla mid-diff, and that's that." "Blaspheming heretic," Takage accused. Elsewhere on the field, Ibara Shiozaki paused and placed a concerned hand over her heart. "Someone has lost their way," she softly intoned to her confused team. When the buzzer finally sounded, the teams were all set. Izuku, with his gravity negated, rested on the shoulders of Ochako, Yui, and Mei with the 10 million point headband wrapped around his forehead. Izuku locked eyes with a locked-in Bakugo and an equally steely-eyed Todoroki. He knew full well that they'd be gunning for him to start. and he just hoped that the other teams were sufficiently hesitant about going after him following his earlier stunt. "Begin," Midnight shouted, and everyone moved. As Izuku expected, Bakugo's team of himself, Kirishima, Mina, and Siro made a beeline towards him with several teams trailing a bit behind to pick the scraps of the encounter. He lightly kicked his legs back to signal to Mei and Ochako to duck their heads, and the team blasted off into the air with Mei's jetpack, leaving the rest to duke it out amongst themselves. "Oh no you don't," Bakugo growled before blasting himself into the air after them. "What's this? Team Midoriya has gone airborne and Bakugo is chasing after them. They're taking this battle to the skies." On the ground, Toru's team of herself, Gyro, Sato, and Koda watched in slight dismay, with the exception of Toru herself, who had elected to go topless for added sneakiness and would not be deterred by such paltry concepts as gravity. "Sato, throw me as hard as you can," Toru shouted. "But you're not wearing a shirt," he sputtered. "Just do it," she commanded. Above ground, Bakugo propelled himself to his target with a vicious snarl. "You can't escape from me," he shouted with crackling palms, readying a powerful blast. "Yui," Izuku signaled, and she dutifully dug into her pocket and retrieved a small clump of sand. With a quick application of her quirk, she threw the rapidly enlarging grains of sand at Bakugo, halting his approach and knocking him back down to earth. Amazing. Such an excellent application of the tried and true staple of both offense and defense, pocket sand. It is a pretty reliable tool. "Great work, now we can hang up here and play keep away," Izuku began before something in his periphery grabbed his attention. He saw the headband careening towards him much too late, though, and an invisible hand snatched his headband off of his head and took it with it into the open air. Only when he noticed the pair of pants and shoes trailing behind it did everything click. "Shit," he screamed in horror. "Ha! You snooze, you lose, Midori," the invisible girl taunted back. "And it looks like the 10 million points have been snatched away. Team Hagakure rockets into first place. What the hell are you teaching these kids, Eraser?" "Honestly, I can't lay claim to that. That's their own grit and ingenuity at work. Iron sharpened iron. You heard it here first, folks. Eraserhead is a terrible teacher." "Why did I agree to this?" "We have to catch her," Sato shouted on the ground. "On it," Gyro replied, stabbing her jacks into the ground just behind them and amplifying her heartbeat as much as she could, resulting in a boom that rocketed them forward to close the distance between themselves and their successful rider. They nearly had her back in their grasp right before a detached forearm flew from out of nowhere and yoinked the 10 million points and the first place position away from them. "Would you look at that? The 10 million points have been taken again. They're playing hot potato." "Again, why are you screaming?" Izuku and Ko watched his headband be ripped away from the invisible thief in worry, as Takeji's arm could fly faster than the four of them could with the jetpack. "How are we going to get back the headband?" Ochako spoke her concern to Izuku. "Oh, we're getting back that headband," Izuku replied in a low, resolute tone. "Hang on." The group nosedived toward Toru's team, and Izuku snatched her headband before rocketing away. "Call that a finder's fee," he shouted to the indignant girl they were flying away from. "Be careful not to exhaust all of the fuel. It has a limited supply," Mei reminded him. "Right, thanks. Do your goggles enhance your quirk at all?" "Marginally. They work better for smaller things up close, like when I'm making babies. My eyes themselves would work better long distance, which I'm assuming you need." "Yeah. Could you pinpoint our headband and give me a rough estimate on where it would be in, say, 10 seconds? Provided you're really fast. I can give you a general area, but not much more than that." "That'll work just fine. Everyone, hold on as tightly as you can." Midoriya and the gang appear to just be hovering in the air with a headband of significantly lower value. You don't think they've given up, do you? No, they're planning something. Knowing Midoriya, it's probably something stupid. You'll still love to see it, though. No comment. The group hovered above the competition for a few more seconds while the 10 million point headband was locked tightly in Takege's detached grip and dodging strikes from a long tongue, a barrage of sticky balls, and swipes from a sentient shadow. Her forearm made it out of the fray just in time to avoid a snarling Bakugo once again before he was yanked back to his team by Zero. Thinking she was in the clear, she finally made a beeline back to her group. It was at that moment that Mei pointed directly between the headband and the awaiting team, and Izuku cut off the jetpack and landed with the group on the ground, ignited into a bright yellow, and used the group as a pseudo-launch pad to shoot himself to the prize, snagging a few more headbands along the way. Once the 10 million points were back in his grasp, he reignited the jetpack and flew back to his team with a victorious smile. Holy cow, you were right. They did have a plan, and it was stupid, but it paid off big time. Team Midoriya has reclaimed the first-place throne and then some. Elsewhere, two people scowled. One was Todoroki, who felt it was time to take him out. The other was Shinso, who felt the same, but he wasn't especially excited about it after the showing with the blue fire. He had no idea what the hell that feeling was, and he didn't particularly care to find out. Once Izuku was back with the team and the headbands were secure, he sighed. Sorry, Hatsune. I killed the rest of the fuel with that stunt. It's perfectly fine. That move was sure to garner even more attention for my babies, she assured him. He couldn't really tell. Plus, we still have the rocket boots. We're not down and out just yet. Ochako spoke up with a pump of her fist. Yui agreed, diving her hand back into her pocket. And now, we've reached the halfway point of the game. Midoriya, Todoroki addressed him as his team carried him toward Izuku's. I'll be taking that headband now. You're more than welcome to try, Izuku responded with his hands wreathed in the kaleidoscopic fire. Now, Ida, forward. Yaoyorozu, be ready to protect us. Kaminari, do your thing. Todoroki directed his team. Ida's calf engines boosted them forward. Yaoyorozu created an insulated blanket as well as a grounding rod, and Kaminari lit up with his quirk for a 13 million volt indiscriminate shock. Ochako zoomed backward with the rocket boots in time to avoid the brunt of the attack, unlike every other team in the vicinity, but she didn't get far enough. Within that second, however, the four were blanketed in orange fire that the electricity from the attack harmlessly passed over. What? Izuku was befuddled. Is this shit only subconscious or something? How inconveniently convenient. Worry about that later, Izuku, Ochako reminded. We're almost out of room to backpedal. Nowhere left to run, eh? A tired voice sneered beside them. Izuku turned to see Shinso quickly approaching them on a group of very dazed, glazed-eyed riders. Shinso was on them wearing a preemptive victorious smirk, almost trying to rub it in that he was going to snatch the headband away from the golden boy himself. That was until Yui's hand shot out of her pocket and yeeted a handful of sand into his face. Ah! Shinso screamed and immediately started rubbing the sand out of his eyes. Retreat, retreat. Geez, Yui, Izuku remarked while also struggling to hold back his laughter. I didn't forget what he said about you, she curtly replied. Look at that, the trusty pocket sand has made a return. The resulting roar from the crowd at the sight of more pocket sand could have been heard on Island. Shinso's riders had dutifully complied and scampered away from them just in time for an ice wall to seal away any more escape paths, and Todoroki's team was slowly stalking forward at the impetus. Only 1 minute left. Todoroki has cornered the 10 million point team and is poised to take the ultimate prize. But, unbelievably, Team Midoriya has managed to keep away from the ice and defend themselves all the while. Midoriya's not going down till the bitter end. Watching with a keen eye in the upper deck of the arena, Endeavor scowled down at the scene of his son's opponent keeping his distance and staying on his son's left side. He's exploiting your weaknesses. Don't be a fool, Shoto. Elsewhere in the arena, Inko was on her feet in almost tangible pride. Hell yeah, Izu, keep exploiting his weaknesses. Back on the field, Ida got his team's attention. Everyone, we only have 60 seconds remaining. I'm going to do something that will make me useless to you, but it's worth it. What are you going to do? Todoroki asked. Ida prepped his engines for maximum overdrive before entering a running stance. Just make sure you get that headband and hold on tight. Izuku could see Ida preparing to do something, and that was not a good thing at all. Izuku knew that even at his fastest with the yellow flames, Ida at his top speed was faster, and he couldn't dodge without leaving the team behind since the jetpack was out of commission. Instinctively, his yellow flames reignited, and he ignored the light pain in his chest. The yellow flames would make him almost fast enough to move away from him if necessary, but they wouldn't make him fast enough to react at the same speeds. Unless white fire began to bloom in Izuku's hair, intermingling with the yellow fire in an almost perfect union. The world seemed to slow down exponentially for Izuku, and it was just in time, as Ida rocketed for them and quickly closed the distance between the teams. Izuku looked down at his teammates that were practically frozen in place, and he looked back up at the rapidly approaching Ida. He could just barely move his limbs enough to intercept the attack, but he wasn't sure if he could completely avoid having his headband snatched. So, he compromised. As Ida sped by them and Todoroki's hand hooked onto his headband, Izuku snagged a firm hold onto as many headbands around Todoroki's neck as he could manage and yanked them away from the boy as he passed. Hopefully, it would be enough. Recipro burst, Izuku heard when his quirk cut out and time returned to normal. Holy smokes, what just happened? That was one big blur. Why didn't he show off that super speed earlier? Ida, what was that? Todoroki asked in amazement. I forced my torque and RPM into overdrive, which gave me explosive power, he explained. Unfortunately, the recoil stalls my engines for a while. It's a secret move that I've been saving. No one in class knew about it. He turned to Izuku with a competitive smirk. I told you, Midoriya, that I'd do my best to beat you what? What happened? Izuku faced him with a smirk of his own, but that wasn't what gave Ida, or anyone else present, pause. It was the blood streaming down Izuku's face from his nose. And like I told all of you, Izuku slurred with his arm raised, proudly displaying all of the headbands he ripped off of Todoroki's neck. I done plan on losing to anyone today. The insanity, we thought the entire game was just turned completely on its head. Team Todoroki snatched the 10 million points from Team Midoriya, but Midoriya pulled through and snatched a good chunk of points from Todoroki at the same time. But he doesn't look so good. Present Mike covered the microphone and leaned over to Aizawa. He really doesn't look so good. Should we pull him out? He should be able to heal any damage he might have done to himself on the spot, he hesitantly began. But, just in case, we'll send him to Recovery Girl after time is called. Sure enough, Izuku was already quick at work tending to the brain aneurysm he was sure he had just given himself with his pink fire. He would not be telling Recovery Girl or his mother about that. Izuku? Are you okay? Ochako worriedly probed. Yeah, I'm good, he responded with less of a slur. Just tried something new and almost killed myself. I'll be fine. You what? Both Ochako and Yui exclaimed in alarm. Oh, folks, Midoriya's efforts were only enough to land him in 5th place, just outside of the cutoff for advancement. There's not much time left in the game. What will they do? Don't let 'em get away, Izuku shouted. We can still win if they're sitting ducks. Then let's go. We can get those points back easy, Ochako encouraged with utter determination, and the group charged for Todoroki's with nothing but victory on their minds. Yui yanked one of the lower-value headbands from Izuku and clutched it in her hand. Meanwhile, Yayurazu and Kaminari prepared themselves to defend their rider. Izuku killed the pink fire and reignited a flaming mosaic along his right arm, poised to deck Todoroki and take his headband by force. Todoroki responded in kind by shielding with his ignited left arm and preparing to freeze Izuku in his tra. Wait, ignited? Todoroki had unconsciously unleashed the fire half of his quirk to defend against Izuku, and the revelation startled him enough that he did nothing to defend against the flame-enhanced right hook that slammed into his cheek. Kaminari prepared to zap the attackers, but Yui enlarged the headband into a tarp and threw it point-blank at Kaminari's face, surprising him enough to misfire his quirk and electrocute his teammates. Izuku used that moment to snatch Todoroki's original headband from his forehead, as he didn't want a chance going for the 10 million and accidentally taking a decoy. With just 11 seconds left, Team Midoriya has jumped to third while Team Bakugo leapfrogs into second after reclaiming their own points. Just as he announced that a hole was blown through the ice wall, and a practically frothing Bakugo blasted into the fray. "You can't escape from me, you bastards. I will be the ultimate champion," Bakugo bellowed to his two biggest competition. The game is almost over, and the top 3 teams are facing off for the top spot. Time for a countdown. Bakugo shot like a missile toward the fracas with explosions on his mind. Todoroki was a snarling wreck at being forced to use his fire, and Izuku's entire upper body was lit ablaze in preparation for the inevitable impact. Time's up. And with that announcement, all 3 riders fell face first to the ground. The horses all shared a collective sigh of relief at the end of one of the most intense face-offs they had ever experienced. In first place, Team Todoroki. In second place, Team Bakugo. In third place, Team Midoriya. And in fourth place, with a comically large headband just barely edging them into the spot, Team Shinso. These 4 valiant teams will advance to the final round. "Thanks for the lift," Shinso said to his newly conscious and thoroughly befuddled teammates before walking away with a smug smile. The smile was only partially faked, as he still had some sand left to clear out of his vision. Izuku was sitting on the ground and trying to both regain his energy while he waited for the world to stop spinning. His head slightly ached, and he just hoped that his mother didn't catch sight of the blood. It was wishful thinking, and he knew it, but he could still hope. "Midoriya," Todoroki addressed him as he walked to the teen and stood over him. "Can we talk? Alone?" Izuku stared quizzically at the heterochromatic teen before nodding and getting up to follow the boy, just barely missing an unhappy duo of recovery girl and his mother sniffing around the area for him. They ended up in a hallway connected to the faculty and student entrance of the arena. The two only silently stared at each other. Izuku knew that Todoroki was merely working up the nerve to say what he wanted to say or ask whatever it was that he wanted to ask, so he didn't fill the silence at all and gave the boy all the time he needed. "I was overwhelmed, and it made me break the promise I made to myself a long time ago," Todoroki finally spoke up. Izuku knew that there was even more to come, so he didn't interrupt and let his classmate find his words. "Ida and Kaminari, Yaoyorozu and Uraraka, none of them felt it. In that moment, I was the only one who could sense your true power, and it was overwhelming. It reminded me of—" Todoroki trailed off, and a terse frown found its way onto his countenance. He stopped looking at his left hand, and he stared Izuku in the eye. "Are you a bastard child of endeavor?" Izuku was not expecting that question. In fact, one could probably say with a decent level of accuracy that he was expecting quite literally anything other than that. The idea was so ludicrous that he wanted to laugh it off as a really dry joke from the stoic boy, but he was mostly certain that Todoroki wasn't aware of the sheer volume of hatred his mother wielded for endeavor that would make that joke funny. "I know that not even you truly believe that's a possibility," Izuku finally answered. Todoroki sighed in relief. "I just had to be sure." A silence fell between them, but it wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward, either. Izuku stared blankly at Todoroki, and Todoroki returned the stare. It was as if the two were truly seeing each other for the first time. "Endeavor is my father. You've clearly heard of him, so you must be aware that he's the current no. To hero," Todoroki began, and Izuku nodded in confirmation. "My old man is ambitious. He aims for the top. He's used his power to make a name for himself as a hero, but he was never able to beat All Might, so the symbol of peace always remained ahead of him as living proof of his own failure. He's still at it, though, trying to take All Might down a peg in one way or another. Izuku did not like where this was headed. He truly did not. Have you ever heard of quirk marriages? Oh no, 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 please no. They became a problem in the first few generations after superpowers became widespread. There were those who sought out powerful mates, with the sole intention of creating powerful children, closer to super soldiers given the turmoil society was back in those days. Izuku finished to Todoroki's surprise. So, you're aware? Yeah. I've done quite a bit of research on quirks and societal progress over the centuries in spite of quirks. It was a rabbit hole I fell down after stumbling on paranormal singularity theory. So, you know that people were often forced into relationships under the guise of old-fashioned arrangements. And yeah, you're going where I think you're going with this, aren't you? Todoroki closed his eyes, and a lengthy exhale escaped his nostrils. Yeah. Another silence fell upon the two, and it was far less comfortable than the previous one. Todoroki opened his differing eyes to stare at Izuku's reaction, and he saw a furrowing of Izuku's brow that slowly deepened into a frown. Soon, that frown grew even darker, and his face fell into a snarl before he stopped and composed himself. Your father is a real piece of shit. Todoroki would be lying if he said that he was expecting that kind of reaction. He didn't really know Midoriya at all. He just knew that he was someone else on the planet that had a fire quirk, and apparently their moms used to be friends, but he hasn't truly confirmed that yet. He would ask his own mother about it when he finally worked up the gall to see her in person. For now, though, he couldn't help the small smile from forming. Yeah, he really is. My mom hasn't ever told me why she hates Endeavor so much, but I'm really starting to see it, Izuku said. That also took Todoroki by surprise. He had figured that he knew at least everything that his mother had told Bakugo in Recovery Girl's office after the battle trials. She hasn't? No, she doesn't like to talk about it, and I don't make her. I just know that there's some personal beef between them. Todoroki internally deliberated on if he should reveal what he heard the boy's mother say. It was pretty relevant to what he himself was planning to tell him, but it also came from a different perspective, a different level of hurt that he couldn't speak to. Ask your mother about it after the festival, Todoroki suggested. It'll help truly contextualize the monster that my father is. For now, however, my father's sole goal in his life right now is to build me up to usurp All Might. Todoroki's fists tightened. I refuse to be a tool for that scumbag. He's the reason that my mother is crying in every memory I have of her. She called my left side unbearable before she splashed boiling water on my face. Everything made a little too much sense to Izuku in that moment. The heterochromia with the scald mark over Endeavor's eye on the side with Endeavor's hair all came together. The reason I challenged you was both because I wanted to settle our previous battle and because I needed to prove to my father that I can win without having to rely on his damn fire quirk. I needed to prove that I can defeat a powerful fire quirk using only my mother's ice and put his twisted ideology to bed for good. He looked back up to Izuku with a smoldering determination. I'm going to show him that I reject his power and that I can take first place and be a hero without using his damn quirk. Izuku briefly looked down and considered everything the other boy had said. Todoroki turned to leave, but Izuku spoke up. I believe it. What? I believe that you can win this festival and be a great hero while only using your ice, that is, barring some specific situation where you'd have to cauterize a wound on a civilian so that they don't bleed out. But I'm certain even you could get past that hang-up for the sake of saving a life, right? Todoroki knew the question was merely rhetorical, but he also strongly suspected that there was a right and wrong answer to the question that he didn't want to potentially get wrong, so he remained silent. You're incredibly strong, and you trained exceptionally hard for this. even beyond the torture your father put you through. You worked your ass off to get where you are now. So, yes, I do believe that you can do it, but I don't believe that you should have to." "What do you mean?" "Our lives are honestly pretty similar in many ways, even if they couldn't be any more different in many others. We're both children of pro-heroes. We were both trained to the bone from a very young age, and we both have massive expectations on us. However, my mom didn't train me to the point of abuse or isolate me socially, and she was the only one who believed in my dream to become a hero when most others wouldn't dare attach that aspiration to a quirkless kid." "Oh, right, you're a late bloomer." "Yeah, and my dad was a quirkist terrorist." Todoroki's eyes widened at that statement, and he wasn't sure what to do with that information. "My dad was a deadbeat that pretty much bounced when I got my initial diagnosis, but when he found out that mom was training me despite my official status, he flipped out and came back home with the intention of killing me. Probably her as well." "What happened?" "My mom atomized him and dispersed him into the open air." There was a pregnant pause between the two teens and the third one listening in on the conversation around the corner. "Excuse me?" "Well, I wasn't home for his arrival, but apparently he attacked her and tried to look for me in our apartment, so she tore him apart by his base components. Her quirk is attraction of small objects, and I figure that there isn't a minimum size requirement, only a maximum. So, yeah, he's pretty dead, if removal from existence even counts as death. I bring that up to stress that my father was an abject pile of squirrel shit, and I don't miss him at all. My quirk also mostly comes from him, as he could breathe fire. Do you see where I'm going with this?" Todoroki's eyes widened in realization, and he frowned in apprehension. "They're not the same." "They're not," Izuku agreed, "but whenever I use my quirk, hell, whenever I see fire at all, in the back of my mind, I can't help but be reminded of him. I think about the man who cared about me so little that he was ready to kill me and my mother just because he felt I was rising above my station. I think about the man who only valued what my quirk status could provide, rather than who I was as a person, as his own progeny." He lit a small, colorful flame in his hand. "But I don't think of it as his quirk. It's not his quirk, it's mine. It always has been mine, and it always will be mine alone. No one can change that, least of all him." He cut the flame and looked Todoroki in the eye. "Your quirk, be it the fire half or the ice half, is no one's but your own. It's not your father's quirk or even your mother's quirk, and no one gets to dictate that but you. You can be the best damn hero you want to be using your quirk how you see fit because it's your quirk and yours alone, and you are the master of your own destiny. Don't think of any part of your quirk as a shackle to overcome. Instead, take it, make it your own, and be the best damn version of Shoto Todoroki that you can possibly conjure up that answers to no one but himself." Todoroki was thrown back to a memory long forgotten. It was a memory of himself and his mother watching an interview that All Might did in which he echoed the same sentiments that he had just been given. He remembered his mother asking him if he still wanted to be a hero as he was positively transfixed by the screen. He remembered her reminder to stay true to himself. "You are not a prisoner of your lineage. It's okay to use your power to become who you want to be." Todoroki was not crying. He was not. "Got him, you?" Todoroki choked out and leaned against the wall. Tears silently escaped his clenched eyelids, and he felt a soft hand on his shoulder. Taking a leap of faith and opening his puffy, newly red eyes, he saw the other boy giving him a kind smile before patting him on the shoulder. "You're not alone. You never are." Todoroki sniffled. "Thank you, Midoriya." He stood up straighter and composed himself. "I'm going to kick your ass in the final round despite this conversation." Izuku offered him a challenging smirk. "Like I said before, you're more than welcome to try, but I don't plan on losing today." Todoroki turned away to leave the hallway and catch the tail end of lunch before the final round began, but he stopped when he heard Izuku speak up again. "Make it a good fight, though," Izuku challenged. Todoroki offered his own smirk back at him. "You're on." Bakugo, meanwhile, stood silently on the wall around the corner. He had quite a lot to think about. "Where the hell is that boy?" An irate recovery girl growled beside a festering Inko as they scoured the halls of the stadium. "When I get my hands on him, the sheer recklessness of that little hellion." Inko, while very upset with what she had seen during the cavalry battle and their inability to find her son afterward, wasn't particularly angry like the medic walking beside her. She was much more concerned about what might have resulted from the fusion of his flames, and she just wanted to check on her son to make sure he was okay before the final round. It was taking a while to find him, however, and he most likely didn't have his phone on him. "Ugh, this is hopeless, and I have to get back to the office in preparation for the final round," recovery girl huffed in frustration. "If you do see him, please send him to me immediately so that I can look him over before he steps out on the field again and maybe whack him one good time with my cane." "Sure thing," Inko sighed, and the two parted ways. Inko checked her phone and saw that the break for lunch would be over in around 15 minutes, so she proceeded forward to continue her search. That was interrupted when she walked by a set of stairs where Endeavor was exiting from. The two locked eyes, and a tense silence fell amongst the hallway. Inko's emerald gaze hardened to a stone-cold glare, and Endeavor's own turquoise eyes narrowed. There wasn't any hatred or malice in his stare, rather apprehension of the highest order. Inko's glare carried more than enough hatred for the both of them, though. Not a word was uttered between them. The smoldering rage within the woman was written clearly on her face and in her posture, but the large man held firm and would not bend an inch. This was the scene All Might stumbled on when he came to investigate the sudden chill that crawled up his spine, and he wished that he hadn't. The vitriol from Inko wasn't even directed at him, and he still felt entirely unsettled just being in the vicinity. He couldn't imagine how the flame hero must have been faring. "Verdant," Endeavor calmly acknowledged, carefully keeping his voice even. "Endeavor," she returned, not even trying to mask the venom in her tone. "Your son is doing well thus far," he evenly remarked. "So is Ray's," she spat, and the flinch she received from the comment only vindicated her. Another silence followed, this one even more tense than the previous one. All Might had absolutely no idea what to do, or if he should even say anything. He didn't know if either of them even knew he was there since they hadn't acknowledged his presence, and he didn't really know if he wanted them to, either. He tried making conversation with the no-2 hero to catch up after a decade, but he was quickly and curtly rebuffed before being informed that the man's son was created to surpass him. That was a strange and mildly alarming bit of information on its own, but the standoff before him was on another level. He didn't know what the history was between the two, and he wouldn't be ashamed to admit that he was not at all comfortable asking either of them. He would make a note to broach the subject to young Midoriya later on if he remembered. The silence dragged on for another few minutes, and All Might felt like he could physically cut through the tension with a Detroit smash and still not make much headway. Then, as if on cue, the two walked past each other without another word, and All Might could breathe again. Coincidentally, Izuku turned a corner at that moment and strolled down the hall in the opposite direction of his mother, and he couldn't get a word out before she was on him. "Oh, honey, what happened to you during the cavalry battle? Your nose was bleeding, and you could barely keep yourself upright." The worried mother fretted over her son after glomping him. "I'm fine, Mom," Izuku replied while half-heartedly fighting out of his mother's hold. "I tried something out during the battle in a no-win situation to mitigate the loss. Apparently, I confused the effects of my yellow and white flames to supercharge my cognition even further. I won't be doing it again, though." "You'd better not," she scolded, hugging him even tighter. "Your nose was bleeding like crazy, and who knows what kind of brain hemorrhaging you could have instigated if you kept it up for any longer. We're going to Recovery Girl right this minute to make sure you didn't do any permanent damage." Izuku sighed in resignation, knowing he wouldn't be able to escape his fate. "All right, Mom." She nodded, and she sent him the warmest smile she could. You were fantastic out there, my little baby. Please stop, not in public, Izuku protested while blushing a bright red, still not really trying all that hard to deny his mother's doting. Hey, All Might. All Might and Inko jumped in surprise. All Might forgot that he was still standing there, and Inko hadn't even realized that he was there. She cursed herself for getting sloppy, but she blamed it on Endeavor that time. Young Midoriya, your mother is right. You were excellent out there. All Might spoke up when he finally regained himself, and he walked alongside them to the nurse's office. Unbeknownst to All Might, the vestiges were locked in a heated debate within One for All. We can't let Eighth pass the quirk onto the boy. It'll kill him, Yoichi argued from his seat. Well, we have to find some way to get in contact with him, Nana argued just as fervently. We can't speak to Toshi, and Izuku's the only one who could connect us with the outside world. He's our only hope as a medium. She's not wrong, Degoro spoke up, even if her real reason is that she just wants to see her grandson again. Shove it, Baldy. We have to get the information about Singularity to Eighth somehow, Hickage agreed. If he passes it on to anyone with a quirk, it'll kill them much faster than it killed me, maybe even instantaneously. I don't see why we should incur the attention of the Shinigami just so Seventh can speak to her relative again, supplied the third cantankerously. It's petty and meaningless at best. Don't be bitter that I'm the only one here that chose to procreate, Nana defended. Stop making the fact that I'm the only one with any living relatives the issue. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely certain that's the case, Yoichi responded with a frown. He didn't need to expand any further on that, as each of the others feared the implication. Then it makes finding a new wielder that much more imperative, and finally spoke his piece. We can't do anything to influence Eighth, but maybe we can send the boy a subtle signal when he's in the vicinity. Oh, and are we banking on him having some Ghostbusters tech laying around to pick up a signal or something? The second retorted, and he only received quizzical stares in return. What? Are you telling me that Ghostbusters is already lost to time? It's worth a shot, Hickage assented with a shrug. Now that he's cognizant of our existence, he might be more sensitive to attempts at communication. Most of the other vestiges shrugged in acceptance. It wasn't a perfect theory, but it was all they had. How do we go about that? Anne asked the group. We can try screaming at him, Degoro suggested. Then he stood up and cleared his throat. Hey, Broccoli, he shouted out into the void. What the hell? Broccoli? Nana asked incredulously. It was the first thing that came to mind, Degoro defended. Wait, it might have done something. Yoichi hushed the group as he was peering through All Might's eyes. The boy flinched when you screamed. It might not have been related at all, but it's better than nothing. Let's all try together. 5 of the vestiges sprung up from their chairs, while the remaining 2 begrudgingly stood as well, and they readied themselves for the attempt. All right, Yoichi began. 3, 2, 1. Hey, Broccoli Izukikid. The trio stepped into the medical ward, and Izuku had the wherewithal to dodge the swing from Recovery Girl's cane. What have I told you about overdoing it? The youthful heroine chastised. He began to defend himself until he slumped. Yeah, I don't really have an excuse for this one. He received a whack to the shin for his troubles. You're damn right, you don't, she huffed. Now, sit so I can run a diagnostic on you. I know you at least mended whatever damage you might have done to yourself, but better safe than sorry. Yes, ma'am, he complied. While she was running the diagnostic, something caught the teenage boy's attention. What the? Izuku muttered in confusion. He swore he just heard or maybe felt something or someone calling out to him. He couldn't really place it until it happened again, and he could follow the sensation to All Might's general direction. Young Midoriya, is everything all right? All Might asked. Inko looked a bit concerned as well. She didn't want to think he had done that much damage to his brain to where he was hallucinating. Izuku stared at All Might for a few more moments, and then it clicked. Oh, yeah, everything's fine. I think your quirk is trying to communicate with me, though. That gained the attention of the three adults, and even Recovery Girl was interested. Outside of Izuku's stunt before the cavalry battle, she had only heard about what the blue flame could do when it awakened and hadn't seen it for herself. Izuku allowed a small, colorful flame to bloom in his palm, and he concentrated until it became the familiar sapphire. Gesturing for All Might to step a bit closer, he slowly jutted his hand toward him until he could feel a connection. When he felt the gentle caress of his grandmother's hand again, he relaxed. When another, distinctly male hand latched onto his wrist, he almost panicked. "Wait, stay calm," he heard a man call out to him from All Might's direction, but he only saw the large man standing there. That was until a shadowy, almost translucent figure began to manifest out of him. Izuku looked around, and the other occupants were only staring at him, so they likely couldn't see what he was seeing. "I'm the first wielder of One for All," the man that he could make out had white hair and possibly green eyes stated. "The other vestiges and I have an urgent message that we ask you to deliver to 8th. "8th?" Izuku questioned, much to the confusion of the adults present. "All Might," the Phantom clarified. "He cannot pass on One for All to anyone with a quirk. Multiple quirks inhabiting a single person will shorten their lifespan, and One for All is much too powerful for anyone with another quirk to survive it. The next wielder must be quirkless like he was." That was a lot for Izuku to take in, and he dumbly nodded. "Got it." The white-haired apparition stepped back, and the familiar sight of his grandmother returned to him. She didn't say anything, only reaching over and embracing him. Even with her non-physical form, he still felt the entirety of the love poured into that one hug. Then, without a word, she pulled away, and his quirk shut off. "Izuku, is everything okay?" Izuku did not immediately reply, instead basking in the residual warmth from his grandmother's hug and parsing the information that was given to him. When he finally looked up, he turned to Recovery Girl. "Did you find anything of note?" he asked her. "Nothing worrisome," she answered. "You're lucky this time. It seems you did a pretty good job at preventing your brain from sustaining any damage. I don't want to have to tell you a third time not to mess around with that. Just please keep the experimentation to training and not in the heat of battle." "I will. I promise that it won't happen again," Izuku responded with a nod. "I don't believe you, but I'll take your word for it," Recovery Girl sighed. Izuku then turned to All Might and his mother once more. "Well, One for All has news." "Finally, the tournament," Kirishima said with a wide grin. "I get the chance to show what I'm made of." "Wait, so is the third round always a tournament?" Mina asked. "Yeah, the last round is always a one-on-one competition," Zero answered. "They just change what that competition is every year. Last year, it was foam sword fights." "Foam sword fights? That's something," Ochako thought to herself with a laugh. "Izuku still isn't here, though. I didn't see him for the whole lunch period, so I hope he doesn't miss anything important." She cut her thoughts off when she heard the slight crunching of gravel a little bit behind her, and she turned her head to see Izuku approaching her. "Oh, wow, you heard me coming," Izuku commented with a smile. "Training with my mom served you well, I see." Ochako accepted the praise with a smile of her own. "I finally get what you meant about listening for everything, although I don't think I have your level of paranoia just yet. Where were you, by the way?" That's probably genetic," he waved it off. "And I was with Recovery Girl. She wanted to look me over to make sure I didn't permanently damage myself during the cavalry battle." Ochako nodded at the explanation, having more faith than she probably should that her friend would be able to shrug off a concerning amount of damage in a short period of time. She'd check back up on him later, though, just in case. "Come closer and draw lots to see who you'll be up against. Then enjoy the pleasure of the recreational games before we start," Midnight announced to the gathered competitors. The 16 finalists have the option to participate in those games or sit out to prepare for battle. I'll start with the first place team. Excuse me, Ojiro raised his hand with an expression that was adjacent to shame. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'd like to withdraw. There were a few gasps, and the gathered competitors all began murmuring in confusion. Someone was willfully withdrawing from a rare chance to get scouted. It wouldn't be right for me to continue on, Ojiro said. I barely remember anything from the cavalry battle until the very end of it. I think it was that guy's quirk. I know this is a great opportunity, and I wish I could take advantage of it. But my conscience won't let me take something I didn't really earn. It wouldn't be fair to everyone who worked hard to get here. Nyanjeki Shota from Class 1B, another boy spoke up as he approached midnight. I think I should withdraw for the exact same reason. This isn't how I wanted to get here. It would go against the values of the festival to advance without earning my spot. A few from 1B and even Shinso himself looked toward the final member of his team, the tall boy with the mantis head, Toguro Kamakiri. Shinso was initially going to snag Aoyama with his quirk just because he was in the vicinity, but he decided against it and chose the seemingly more powerful Kamakiri to round out his squad. There was the chance that a confrontation with Team Midoriya would be tougher than anticipated, so he went with the stronger option. The slight twitch in his eye from the phantom sting of sand at the reminder soured his mood a bit. Kamakiri was silent for a moment and looked rather pensive while he evaluated his options. It was true that he didn't want to advance that way, either. It was a blow to his pride to be used as a mindless puppet while the guy who did it frolicked about without a care. Still, though. Nah, I'll stick around, Kamakiri finally spoke up. I'll just beat that purple kid's ass in the tournament. That'll make me feel better. The boys' surrounding classmates fell to the ground in a mixture of amusement and incredulity at his very Kamakiri-esque response. Never change, dude, the short, speech bubble head of manga Fukadashi remarked with a chuckle. This sort of talk is incredibly naive, my boys. It turns me on. Shota, Ojiro, you're withdrawn, she announced, doing her very best to not fidget at the glare she could feel on her from Enko with the other pros. After a brief bit of deliberation in which Team Kendo declined the invitation and passed it off to Team Tetsutetsu, it was decided that Shiozaki and Tetsutetsu would be the ones to fill the 2 open spots in the finals. The newly minted 16 finalists drew lots, and the results were displayed on the screen. Match 1, Hitoshi Shinso vs. Katsuki Bakugo. Match 2, Toguro Kamakiri vs. Mina Ishido. Match 3, Yui Kodai vs. Momo Yaoyorozu. Match 4, Ibara Shiozaki vs. Denki Kaminari. Match 5, Tenya Ida vs. Mei Hatsum. Match 6, Shoto Todoroki vs. Hantasiro. Match 7, Eijiro Kirishima vs. Tetsutetsu. Match 8, Ochako Uraraka vs. Izuku Midoriya. Shinso was a little sour at the fact that he and Midoriya were on opposite sides of the bracket, so he wouldn't possibly face him unless they both made it to the finals. Well, guess I'll just have to make it to the finals, then. Yeah, that's it. I'll make it all the way to the end and put him in his place on the grandest stage, Shinso hyped himself up, not even paying attention to who his opponent was. It wouldn't matter, ultimately. He'd snag them with his quirk and force them to leave the ring. Easy peasy. Bakugo, on the other hand, was more nettled that both Izuku and Icy Hot were on the other side of the bracket, so he'd only possibly get to face one of them. However, he looked over to where Shinso was walking away from the screen and hyping himself up to face their class rep in the final round of the bracket. That pissed Bakugo off quite a bit. Todoroki looked at his spot in the bracket, and then he looked over towards the end of the bracket. We're in the same half of the bracket. Good. Izuku and Ochako stared at their placements on the bracket. They'd be fighting each other in the last match of the first round, and neither really knew just how to feel about that. Well, Ochako drawled as she tore her eyes from the screen and looked over at her best friend. I guess this means we're rivals now. Izuku snorted, and only at the mildly offended face of his friend did he speak. Weren't we already rivals the minute you asked my mom for training, fellow graduate of the Midoriya Hellspawn Academy? Ochako couldn't fight the laugh that came out of her. Really? That's the name you're going with? It sounded better in my head, okay? Izuku flushed with a pout. Sure. I'd hardly say I've graduated. Anyway, I'm sure there's still plenty of things she can teach me. Not that I'd tell you what she did teach me. Not even for more mochai. Nope. Izuku sighed in good-natured defeat. Well, guess I'll just have to see for myself. Then, may the best hero win. May the best hero win, Ochako returned. The side games had concluded. The ring was created. It was time for the tournament. Bakugo stood alone in the hallway leading from 1A's waiting room with a stone-cold glare etched into his face. This was the first stop in his path to becoming the No. 1 hero. He had almost squandered it all before the journey could even really begin, but he would rectify it all in the tournament. He would win and prove he was the best through his hard work and unwavering tenacity. Bakugo, a somewhat familiar voice called from behind him. He turned his head to see his classmate with the tail approaching him. I figured I'd just warn you about your opponent's quirk, he began. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm pretty certain he could control you like a puppet if you respond to something he says. Just be careful out there. Bakugo said nothing as he stared at the tailed boy, and then he gave a slight nod and turned back around to enter the arena at President Mike's call. All right, sports fans, let's cut to the good stuff and not delay this finals any longer. Give it up for our first fighters. With explosive palms and a temper to match, it's Katsuki Bakugo from the hero course. Kick his skinny, little ass, Katsuki, Mitsuki shouted next to Masaru on their couch. No mercy. And from general studies, he hasn't really done much up to this point, Hitoshi Shinso. Up in the students section of the stands, Class 1A was talking amongst each other rather animatedly about the coming battle. So, do you think that Shinso guy stands a chance? Shiro asked to no one in particular. Nah, Bakugo's got this in the bag, Kaminari responded. I do kinda wish it was Midoriya taking him on instead, though. I'd pay to see our class rep wipe the floor with him after that day a few weeks ago. You mean when Midoriya called him skinny fat? Sato added mirthfully, which elicited a laugh from most of the class in attendance. Izuku, meanwhile, was watching them enter the ring closely. He didn't know exactly what the kid's quirk was, but he assumed it involved some sort of mental paralysis, if what Ojiro said was true. Maybe it was touch-activated. Ojiro didn't mention anything about being touched, though, only that Shinso said something to him and everything went black. Voice-activated, maybe. That would make sense, and his quirk was dangerous if that was the case. If a verbal response was all Shinso needed, then it would be a more difficult match than his classmates were giving it credit for. Bakugo was never very hard to rile up in his experience. Ready? Begin. So, Katsuki Bakugo, huh? I've heard about you, Shinso began with a bored expression. You're the famed delinquent of 1A that went overboard in a training exercise. Bakugo's stony glare tightened a little bit, and Shinso slyly smirked. I'm frankly surprised that they even let you compete. I thought that even Yua had standards against creating villains, but I suppose I shouldn't be. You must have a really powerful quirk if they're willing to bend over backwards for you. Let me guess, you grew up in an indoctrination zone and never had to face any consequences for your actions, huh? Bakugo's eye twitched, but he made no response beyond that. Shinso continued nonetheless. Getting a good look at you now, I'm not really all that impressed. I guess even terrorists sometimes make mistakes, right? Bakugo closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Shinso felt great about the situation, as it looked to him that it wouldn't be much longer before the blonde flew off the handle and found himself ensnared in his quirk. Bakugo, however, remained silent, and he opened his eyes to give Shinso a rather bored glare. Then, he tilted his head and pointed to the side of his chin. Then he pointed at Shinso, and then he finally held up one finger. Shinso was confused at first, so Bakugo motioned a punch at his exposed chin and pointed at Shinso again. Now, the message was clear to him and everyone watching. Bakugo was giving him a free shot. If Shinso didn't already feel insulted by the silence of the hero student, that certainly did it. What's this? Is Bakugo giving Shinso a free shot? Is that wise? We'll see. Shinso grit his teeth and quickly made his way toward the ash blonde. Of course, you damn hero students always thinking you're better. Don't cry when this backfires on you. Shinso ran towards Bakugo and threw a hard punch to the spot Bakugo indicated on his chin. That was a mistake, as Shinso immediately recoiled and clutched his hand, truly feeling as if he cracked something. Bakugo gently rubbed the spot that was punched before giving the boy an unimpressed quirk of his eyebrow, and then he threw a right hook of his own that slammed into Shinso's jaw, sending him to the ground in a heap. The boy was hollering in pain and clutching his jaw tightly, and Bakugo only stared down at him with the same stony glare he entered with. Shinso sent him a murderous glare before leaping back to his feet to attack Bakugo again. He threw another punch, but Bakugo easily deflected it and threw a hard punch to the boy's stomach. Shinso would not be deterred, though, and he threw another punch that was again deflected, followed by an elbow to the other side of his jaw and sweeping kick that put him on his ass. Shinso was positively fuming at that point, and the same, almost apathetic glare Bakugo kept on him made him see red. With a furious yell, he charged at Bakugo again, and he was put back down to the concrete again, and again, and again. Soon enough, one could accurately describe the match as Bakugo beating the dogshit out of Shinso with lethargic ease. Every punch Shinso threw was either dodged or deflected, leaving him open for a vicious attack that floored him without fail. Every kick was blocked, leaving him open to a vicious attack that floored him without fail. Every taunt or scathing insult was ignored, usually in tandem with a vicious attack that floored him without fail. The worst part for Shinso: there was not a single explosion the entire time. Bakugo was handing him his ass on a silver platter in front of the world without using his quirk whatsoever. The crowd didn't really know how to feel about the display. They wanted to see action, and they were technically getting that. But what they were watching wasn't exactly a fight. It was closer to a methodical massacre. And Bakugo is absolutely dominating this fight. A bit maliciously, I might add. There's nothing malicious about it. Shinso's quirk is sort of like mine in that it doesn't give him any physical enhancements. However, it's powerful in a way that could theoretically end fights before they even began. But that also comes with the caveat that he has to physically be able to do that, even more so when he comes across an opponent that isn't falling for his tricks. If he wants to be in the hero course as much as he says, he has to be able to defend himself in a straight fight. Otherwise, he'd just be a liability on the field. Bakugo is merely evening the playing field for him by not using his quirk and letting him prove if he can do that in the first place. That's a harsh assessment, even for you, but not an inaccurate one. The explanation from Eraserhead eased the crowd somewhat, but it was hard to get excited for a one-sided slaughter. The relatively low volume of the crowd made it that much easier for Shinso to hear Aizawa's brutal assessment of him and the fight, and it made every hit and fall he took hurt that much more. It truly dawned on him in that moment that the fight was his second entrance exam, and he was bombing it a second time. Well, bombing may not have been the right word, as no explosion followed the stiff punch to his nose that sent him to the ring. His everything ached, his pride was steamrolled, and, as he looked up into the mildly cloudy sky, he could practically see his chances of getting into the hero course and becoming a pro hero turn to dust right before his eyes. He couldn't even blame the sand for the tears in his eyes that he struggled mightily to keep from escaping. "Are you done yet?" Bakugo finally spoke, his glare unwavering for even a millisecond. Or are you still gonna cling to that dumbass idea that you can be a hero without doing any work? Because if this is your best, then Izuku would have murdered you in seconds, and he wouldn't have been nearly as nice about it as I was. I concede, came the broken voice of the teen on the ground. Shinso has conceded. Bakugo moves into the next round, Midnight announced. And there you have it, folks. Katsuki Bakugo is the winner by tap out. The crowd gave a polite applause and some cheers, but many were clearly disappointed at the one-sidedness of the match. Shinso, meanwhile, continued to lay on the ground. If you're done with your damn pity party, you can get to building that spaceship now, or whatever the hell it was that he said, Bakugo annoyedly said to the downtrodden boy as he stood over him. When he extended a hand to help him up, Shinso stared up at it for a moment. Bakugo was beginning to lose his patience, but Shinso slowly reached to take the offered hand. When he did, Bakugo clamped down onto his hand and yanked the boy up to his feet with just the single arm. Then he curtly turned around, stuffed his hands into his pockets, and stalked away from the ring. What a show of sportsmanship! I guess even Bakugo has a heart buried deep inside, Eraser? Let's move on, already. Shinso slowly made his way to the back, as well, and those infamous words played themselves back to him. The problem here is that you're declaring yourself to be among the stars when you've never taken the time to build the spaceship to get yourself there. Build that spaceship first, then meet me on the moon, all right? Meet you on the moon, huh? He caught sight of Izuku on his way out with the rest of 1A, and Izuku was staring back at him. Shinso narrowed his eyes and nodded. Yeah, I'll build that spaceship, and then I'll fly even farther than you could ever dream of. Count on that, Midoriya. Up in the stands, Izuku was confused about the look Shinso gave him. It wasn't explicitly malicious, but it wasn't particularly friendly, either. If he had to compare, it was similar to the looks that Endeavor gave All Might the few times they were on screen, Toj. Oh, got it. Enough standing around. Now welcome to the ring our next players. He doesn't have a nose, but he can still smell weakness. Let's hear it for the Hero Course's Tagaru Kamakiri. That was pretty damn corny, Present Mike, Kamakiri muttered. Versus, what are those horns even for? Will we find out? It's the Hero Course's Mina Ashido. Heh, this first match will be a piece of cake, she said confidently. With the rest of 1A, Izuku watched the two square off before Present Mike started the match, and the two lunged for each other. You have a friend in 1B, right? Ochako asked him. Do you know what Kamakiri can do? No, I don't really know any of their quirks beyond one or two of them, he shook his head. This guy is a mystery to me, too. Said mystery was solved when Kamakiri extended a pair of blades from his arms and took a few swipes at Mina, and she only dodged by the skin of her teeth each time with impressive flexibility before she went on the defensive and skated away from him with her acid. Oh wow, blades, Izuku remarked. I wonder how sharp they are. Could he produce them from anywhere on his body or just his arms? Are they? You really are a quirk nerd, Ochako commented with a giggle. Ha, take a look at that. 1A, came the haughty voice of Monoma from the 1B box next to them. Our very own Kamakiri is wiping the floor with a Shido. He even has her desperately trying to maintain distance because she can't possibly take him up close. This must stick in your egomaniacal craws. A giant fist plowed down onto his head, knocking him out and shutting him up for the moment. Sorry about him, Kendo sheepishly apologized. He wasn't totally wrong, though. Mina did indeed have to keep her distance to avoid Kamakiri's rush of blades. He was really fast, too, and he did well to keep up the pressure and not give her any time to mount a real counterattack. Her dance background paid dividends in the end, though, as she could maneuver around his attacks and slide just out of range. Kamakiri was becoming even more confident as the battle progressed like that. As such, he inevitably slipped up when he allowed a second too long between swings, which Mina capitalized on by splashing acid at him and forcing him to jump away. Afterward, every advance by Kamakiri was rebuffed by another splash of acid from the pink girl, and Kamakiri's blades could only do so much to shield him, so he was kept at a distance. The crowd, now having something to cheer for, was very much into it. Izuku was also interested, taking note that Kamakiri was faster and likely stronger, but he couldn't attack from mid or long range. Mina, on the other hand, could keep him at bay and slide around him while peppering him with attacks, effectively controlling the tempo of the fight so long as she maintained her distance. They were effectively stalemated as things stood, and Izuku surmised that the winner would be determined either by who took the initiative to go in for a close-range assault and accept some damage along the way, or by Mina eventually wearing Kamakiri down in a battle of attrition. Kamakiri had more incentive to go for the first option, and he couldn't wait forever. He seemed to know this, too, as he charged for her when she was nearest to the edge of the ring, shielding himself from the shower of acid by sprouting a plethora of flat blades to take the brunt of the attack. He rushed her and elbowed her in the gut as hard as he could, using the brief moment of respite that she was stunned to grab her arm and attempt to sling her over his shoulder and out of bounds. He wasn't anticipating just how quickly she'd recover, though, and before he could get to the apex of his swing, she locked him into an arm bar and brought him down with her over the line. Both fighters have landed out of bounds. We have a draw, Midnight announced. The crowd was on their feet for a good fight as well as a bit perturbed that there wasn't a decisive winner, but Midnight continued before they could become too antsy. In the event of a draw, we allow the board to decide a tiebreaker event. Everyone looked to the board that had been deciding their fates the entire day, and the anticipation in the arena was palpable. What possible spectacle could await the two combatants? Would it be anywhere close to the frenetic craziness they witnessed in the first 2 rounds? Rock, paper, scissors, Midnight announced. So, no. Kamakiri was rather nettled that his fight would ultimately come down to a game of rock, paper, scissors, but he refused to back down. Mina, meanwhile, was down for whatever. This had already been the most fun she had all day, and forcing her opponent to a tiebreaker already looked good for her scouting report. The two engaged in the most intense bout of rock, paper, scissors that anyone could claim to have ever witnessed, tying another 4 more times before Kamakiri came out the victor on the 5th go-around. The crowd was absolutely roaring. The audience is really hyped for this, Ribbit, Sue observed in her seat behind Izuku. Not every day you get to see a best-of-5 game of rock, paper, scissors, I suppose, Izuku tried to rationalize. A bit anticlimactic after that fight, though. I hope this is the only time that this is necessary. You just jinxed it, Ochako said to him with a smirk. You're probably right. You two are awfully close for having to fight each other later, Sue dryly observed with a hint of mirth betraying her blank expression. I've already accepted my victory, Izuku just as dryly responded with a sly smile that grew even more when Ochako lightly hit him on the shoulder. Dickhead, she responded with a smile of her own. Unseen by the 3, Toru was observing the scene with a keen eye before rubbing her invisible hands together. She was going to ship the hell out of them. I wouldn't be surprised if my mom bribed Principal Nezu to somehow rig it to have us fight each other, Izuku joked. That assumes that us making it to the finals was a given, Ochako entertained the thought. Well, of course, it was a given for me, Izuku continued the bit. I'm practically the protagonist. Okay, remind me to smack that developing ego out of you, she laughed. Hey, Midoriya, Gyro approached him. You mentioned your mom earlier. Is she really verdant? Izuku was surprised at both the question and that she even knew about his mom. Yeah, you know about her? My mom always talks about her. Her eyes practically lit up. Apparently, on my parents' first date, they got held at gunpoint by a mugger in an alley. Verdant just happened to be patrolling nearby, and my parents say that she snatched the gun out of his hand with her quirk and then pistol whipped him until he cried. Honestly, I might not even exist if she wasn't in the area that night. That definitely sounds like something she'd do, Izuku remarked. though that is a little rough, even for her. I wonder what pissed her off that day. Maybe Endeavor. The class fell into talking about Izuku's mom and the show they remembered her putting on at the USJ. Bakugo, meanwhile, had made his way to the Wanna box in time to hear Jiro's story, and he couldn't say that he was all that surprised given what he had learned earlier about what she did to her husband. Look alive, sports fans, the third match is underway. Both 1A and 1B carefully watched the ring as Yui and Yaoyorozu stood across from each other. She's the mute mercenary and queen of the sand, from the hero course, Yui Kodai. Yui stared blankly at the taller girl across from her, and she shoved a hand into her pocket. Versus the mistress of creation. She was admitted through recommendation, so you know her skills are certified. The hero course's Momo Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu somewhat nervously met her opponent's unflinching stoicism, but she had a plan. At present Mike's signal, she quickly created a pair of goggles and a shield to protect from any sand coming her way, be it large or regular sized. She started to create a staff in her free hand to go on the offensive, but the ground beneath her practically vanished, and she fell to the dirt of the arena. Looking ahead, Yui was kneeling with her free hand planted on the newly shrunken ring that barely extended past her. The crowd, Midnight, Cementos, Present Mike, and Wanna were all flabbergasted. None were more flabbergasted than Yaoyorozu herself, who could only stare at Yui in stupefaction. Did she just lose? Kodai just shrunk the entire ring. Is that technically a ring out for Yaoyorozu? I'll allow it. Yui Kodai advances to the next round, Midnight announced, and the crowd erupted once again at the spectacle they just witnessed. Yui silently stood and removed her hand from her pocket, pulling the pocket inside out to reveal that there was no sand to be thrown. It was a bluff, and Yaoyorozu fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Yui returned the ring to its original size before quietly leaving the scene and an almost distraught Yaoyorozu. Ha! That's 2 matches in a row that 1B has proved its superiority to 1A. What a shameful performance from the supposed top dogs. Monoma was again struck by Kendo's giant fist, shutting him up once more. Sorry about him again, Kendo apologized once more. Her apology, as well as Monoma's ravings, went unheard by 1A, as they were slack-jawed and trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. Did you know she could do that? Ochako whispered to Izuku. I hadn't considered that specific possibility, but yeah, I guess I knew she could do something of the sort, Izuku answered without taking his eyes off of the ring. That certainly makes her a dangerous opponent going forward. Now that the ring has been returned to normal size, it's time to welcome new competitors. Even beautiful flowers have thorns. It's the assassin from Class 1B, Ibara Shiozaki of the Hero Course, versus, he's the most electrifying man in the Hero Course, Denki Kaminari. Your puns truly make my existence unbearable. Who do you think will win this one? Ochako asked. Certainly not Kaminari if he shorts himself out in one go, Izuku answered. Oh, come on, have a little faith. He's immobilized. That's all, folks. It was over in an instant. See? The winner is Shiozaki. She advances on, Midnight announced. Oh, what's this I see? A third victory for 1B over 1A in such rapid succession. Monoma began before 2 massive hands clutched the wall on either side of his head. He got the message loud and clear, and he clamped his mouth shut. Izuku's attention was focused elsewhere. However, Shiozaki's vines were under close scrutiny from the boy, especially the way she both ensnared Kaminari so easily and used them as a wall to block his attack. The wall somewhat reminded him of the way his orange fire coated his cavalry team and protected them from his lightning. But the restraining vines really had his attention. He had his cape that could do something similar on a much smaller scale, but he found that he didn't really utilize the cape all that often. It was nice to have, but it felt like an unnecessary accessory for the little practical usage he got out of it, much less than their homeroom teacher used his capture scarf. He wondered if he could utilize his flames in such a manner. At this point, he wouldn't rule out any possibilities as to what his quirk was capable of. And maybe he had a color hidden away in there. Wait, another color. He had accounted for red, orange, green, yellow, blue, white, pink, and possibly black. When he used his base flames, he did see purple in the mix with the rest. What was purple capable of, he wondered? Izuku? He snapped out of his train of thought and looked toward Ochako, only to notice that she and the rest of the class were looking at him strangely. In the background, he could hear the indignant shouts of Ida running around the arena in maze gear while she gave detailed explanations about her babies to the support companies both in attendance and watching across the nation. Oh, I mumbled all that out loud, didn't I? The choruses of yeah, yep, and nerd made him sink into his seat. Anyway, Ochako changed the subject. Ida is up against the crazy inventor girl, and she apparently offered him support equipment to wear to make it a fair match since she had her own. And he fell for that? Izuku deadpanned. Yeah, she sighed. 2 more matches. We should head off to get ready for ours. Izuku would not admit to having completely forgotten about his own match, and no one could prove it if he had. The two left the stands and parted ways in the hallway, leaving Izuku to quietly meander towards whatever designated waiting room he was set to be in for his match. Time to stop this childish rebellion of yours. You have a duty to surpass that imbecile, All Might. Izuku stopped in his tracks and listened to the conversation happening around the corner. He recognized that voice, and the only person he could possibly be talking to was. Shit. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're different from your siblings. You're my greatest masterpiece. The footsteps Izuku was hearing ceased, and the silence that followed was tense. You bastard, he heard Todoroki growl, and his heart began to sink. I am not your masterpiece. I am not your pet project. And I am not your damn tool. I am Shoto, and it's high time that Shoto starts doing what Shoto wants to do. Izuku's heart rose once more, and a smile made its way to his face. Odd manner of referring to himself in the third person aside, Todoroki seemed to have taken what he said to heart. Endeavor could suck it. If, by that, you mean to continue using only your right side, it may work for you in this tournament, but you'll soon find the limits of that power. You'll see reason eventually, Endeavor scoffed. I am not you, Todoroki spat. I am Shoto, and I will win this tournament on my own terms. If that means using more than my right side, so be it. But I won't be doing it for anyone but myself. I will not exist for anyone but myself. I will be a hero and do so how I see fit, because that's what Shoto wants, and Shoto doesn't answer to anyone but himself. Izuku had to physically restrain himself from loudly cheering him on. Todoroki Shoto. He didn't know which one the other boy would prefer being called at this point, had definitely internalized what he had said, and he was throwing it in the face of his father and declaring his own path. Now, the real test would be to see if it actually stuck. He waited a few moments for any noise or footsteps, and he attempted to slick past the hallway intersection unnoticed. Attempted was the operative word, since he made eye contact with Endeavor halfway through the journey. The two silently stared at each other, one a deer in headlights and the other a passive curiosity. You're powerful, boy, the flame hero began, somewhat startling Izuku. You've got a powerful quirk, and you know how to wield it. I have no doubts that you'll end up facing my son in the tournament. Give him a good match, and don't disgrace him or yourself by holding back. The hulking man then turned and walked away, leaving Izuku alone to process what the man had just said to him. Why did it sound like he was scouting me for an internship? We're moving right along to the 6th match. He's got skills, but at the expense of some really creepy-looking elbows. From the hero course, it's Hanta Zero. That was uncalled for, Zero muttered. Versus an early frontrunner in the competition who's way too powerful for his own good. Someone who rightfully got into the hero course based on recommendations. It's Shoto Todoroki. In the waiting area, Izuku sat next to Kirishima and watched the upcoming bout on a TV. Man, I'm so pumped, the red-haired teen shouted with a fist pump. I can't wait to get out there and show what I can do. What about you, Midoribro? You think you can beat your Araka? You want an honest answer? Hell yeah. I have no idea. Kirishima wasn't expecting that. Huh, really? I can't let her touch me with an open palm, which is much easier said than done, especially since my long-range offense needs work. What the? Izuku's eyes were bulging out of his skull and glued to the screen. Kirishima wasn't in a much better state. There was a massive iceberg jutting out of the arena that wasn't there a second prior. I get being upset, but learn some restraint, Izuku muttered to himself. I hope Siro's okay, Kirishima added with a hint of worry. He should be fine, provided he's thawed out quickly, Izuku replied. Welcome back to the finals, everyone. Sorry for the long wait. The insane amount of ice from the last match has been cleared, so it's time to welcome new combatants. The 7th matchup includes 2 completely redundant quirks. One of them is a passionate, manly fighter made of steel. With a name so nice, they gave it to him 4 times. It's the Hero Course's Tetsu. Versus a passionate, manly fighter made of rock. His name is decidedly less goofy. It's the Hero Course's Eijiro Kirishima. When the fight began, the 2 teens rushed each other and threw everything they had as well as the kitchen sink at each other. Izuku watched the first few exchanges, and he could quickly tell that the fight was going to drag on, so he decided to stretch and get himself into the right mindset for his fight. Ochako was not going to be an easy opponent, especially since he doesn't know exactly what sort of tricks his mom could have potentially given her to have an edge over him. He wasn't under any illusions that she hadn't. This was just as much a test for himself as it was for Ochako. He just knew it. He'd have to play it carefully, but he'd be ready. Wow, that hurt me. And all I'm doing is watching these guys. Is it over? Both hardheads have been KO'd, but who is the winner? After assessing the condition of both teens, Midnight declared the match a draw, and the second tiebreaker of the day would be held once the 2 boys were conscious again. Guess I did jinx it, Izuku mused. While we wait for Tetsu and Kirishima to recover, we'll move on to our final battle of the first round. When the pictures of Izuku and Ochako flashed on screen, the crowd roared once again. Everyone seemed to have their eyes on this particular battle. As the 2 combatants made their way to the ring, the smiles they had with the rest of their class now nowhere in sight. The bulk of Class 1A was curious to see if the 2 friends would go all out against each other, as well as what all out would look like for Izuku. Todoroki and Bakugo observed with keen eyes to avoid missing a single detail about Izuku's fighting style. Both boys would be prepared for their rematches. A few in Class 1B wanted to see for themselves what all the fuss was about, as did the civilians and some pros in the audience that recognized him from the interview that circulated. Yui and Takage were really interested in seeing what Izuku looked like in actual combat. Shinso begrudgingly anticipated the fight, if for no other reason to see if what Bakugo had said was true. Inko abandoned whatever jovial atmosphere she had prior to the match and watched the upcoming battle like a hawk. It slightly unsettled All Might beside her, but he was paying close attention as well. He couldn't outwardly cheer for Nana's grandson, but he was rooting for him, and he could practically feel one for all buzzing within, so he knew that she was, too. Many of the seedier parts of society were also paying attention. 2 pairs of red eyes focused on their respective screens, a pair of turquoise eyes scowled derisively, a pair of golden, slitted watched a screen in almost orgasmic interest, and even the scar tissue where eyes once existed was focused on him. The 8th and final battle of our first crop of matches. He already has his own origin story and his sights set on nothing short of victory. From the Hero Course, Izuku Midoriya. Versus the Zero Gravity Zenith. Can this underdog prevail? Also from Class 1A, Ochako Uraraka. Ochako and Izuku stared each other down, both entering into a fighting stance. Let the 8th match begin. Ochako darted toward Izuku with frightening speed, and Izuku quickly ignited yellow and dodged to the side to avoid her advance, kicking up a chunk of concrete in the process. However, she pivoted on a dime and advanced toward him again with palms ready to strike after smacking the debris along the way. Izuku sent a burst of green flame to his legs to leap up and over her, landing a good distance away from her for the moment. So, she knows I'm limited to one direction, and she can quickly change direction to counter that. There are no walls to bounce off of, so reliably outrunning her is out of the question. I don't know how long she can keep up a chase, and it's not worth it to find out. Ochako re-entered her stance, and Izuku did as well. The message was clear that he wouldn't be allowed to bounce around the ring and avoid her, so he wouldn't. Ochako charged him again, and he met her charge this time. Deflect the wrists, go for body shots, keep her hands in sight at all times, be ready to move on a hair trigger. The two finally clashed with Izuku immediately blocking an attack by pinning her wrist. Ochako swiped at him with her free hand, but he ducked and pivoted from the clash and spun around the swipe, batting her arm away and driving a rough elbow into her ribs before sweeping her legs and sending her to the ground. He was afforded no rest, though, as she immediately forced him to jump by rolling into a kick of her own to sweep him off of his feet. Izuku quickly backpedaled to reset and reassess. She was good. Getting through an entire fight without letting her touch him a single time was going to be tough, and crippling her to just be done with it wasn't an option he was going to consider. He really needed to work on his long-range attacks after the festival, but he at least wasn't completely bereft of options in that regard. Ochako returned to her feet and darted for him a third time, sliding her hand across some of the loose debris along the way. He filed that away for later while he met her charge again, ducking and dodging every attempt she made to touch or grab him, and peppering her midsection with jabs and quick elbow strikes. It kept up for a surprisingly lengthy stretch, and Izuku started to grow wary when Ochako's swipes became wild and much less accurate. After one such swipe was deflected, Izuku swept her legs once again to send her flat on her back, and he brought his heel down to slam into her stomach. But she quickly rolled out of harm's way and touched her fingertips. It was at that moment that Izuku knew he had been led into a trap, as the loose debris that he had kicked up earlier and disturbed in his efforts to keep away from Ochako was sent back down to earth right where he was standing. He leaped to the side to avoid the small shower, but Ochako was right on top of him in a split-second poise to negate his gravity. It was only a reactionary flare of his red flames that saved him and made her jump backward to escape the sudden heat. This match is heating up, folks. End me. In the audience, Wano was surprised at the way the match was going. Many were admittedly expecting a curb stomp. Wow, she's really keeping up with him, Gyro remarked. I don't think he's going full throttle yet, Ribbit, Sue replied. But I also don't think she's giving him many opportunities to use his strengths to his advantage. It may be that he doesn't want to seriously burn her, as well, Ida spoke up. Exercising discretion to keep the both of them safe could ultimately lead to his downfall. However, you saying Uraraka will throw herself into danger just to land a hit on him? Kaminari questioned. I'm counting on it, Ida nodded. And Uraraka's not giving an inch. She's still launching herself at Midoriya to finally land that one hit she needs, even though Midoriya is practically melting the ring with every step. Talk about tenacity. It's a little overboard. Like that, then, Sue dryly remarked. In the ring, Izuku was trying even harder to keep away from her strikes to avoid both losing his gravity and seriously burning her. But the ridiculous heat emanating from his crimson fire was not deterring her whatsoever. It mildly alarmed him, but they'd have time to go over self-preservation another day. Izuku intercepted an attempt by her to grab him by snatching both of her wrists and holding them apart. She ignored the burning and threw her forehead into his nose, breaking it and forcing him to kick her in the chest and let her go. She rolled through the fall into a backflip and unzipped her jacket while Izuku readjusted his nose. Unfortunately, that single moment would be his downfall. He looked up just in time to smacked in the face with a pea jacket, and when he tore it away from his face, Ochako was no longer in front of him. His instinct screamed at him to defend, and the crimson fire reverted to kaleidoscopic before he swung his right arm out with a colorful and concussive blast of fire, sending Ochako tumbling painfully away from him. It was too late, though. He was floating. Uraraka's ballsy move paid off. Midoriya is currently without gravity and at her mercy. The crowd was on their feet and cheering up a storm. Several pros in attendance were very pleased with what they were watching. One in particular, a woman with light green hair and an orange bandana, considered the scene carefully. "Look at those kids go," one pro near her complimented. "They're not being as flashy as some of the others, but they definitely know what they're doing down there. Right? That Midoriya kid can move like lightning and his combat sense is top-notch already. He looks like he's in trouble, though." The Uraraka girl tagged him with that distraction, and she's been doing her best to keep up with him the whole time. The conversations around her continued like that, and she started thinking about the interview the boy did outside of his school. Being a beacon for those forgotten by society spoke to her in a way since she loved making people laugh and brightening anyone and everyone's day. She could possibly help him cultivate a friendly, approachable exterior to that end. Maybe she couldn't poach him for Ketsubutsu, but she'd definitely send in an offer for an internship. Back in the ring, Izuku was understandably upset with himself at his predicament. He was a millisecond too slow to halt her attack, and she finally got him. That wasn't the worst part, however. "I did it. It took a month, but I finally got you," she cheered as she slowly made it back to her feet. That was the worst part. Their game where she valiantly tried to sneak up on him and negate his gravity without his notice had finally concluded, and he lost. The match was salvageable, but the loss in their game would sting for quite a while. Speaking of the match, he was slowly floating towards the edge of the ring. That would not do, so he flared his kaleidoscopic fire once more and propelled himself higher into the air and away from the edge, very similarly to what he did at the entrance exam. Wait, has the mysterious rainbow comet from the entrance exam returned? And it was Midoriya the whole time. Mysterious? You knew it was him. You've known since it happened. And he's made his grand return for the sports festival. No 0-pointers to take out this time, though. Ochako was both kicking herself for forgetting that he could do that as well as slightly transfixed with how cool the flying rainbow looked in her opinion. She could no longer return his gravity outside of the ring anymore, so she had to be prepared for whatever attack he mounted in this state. She didn't have to wait long, as Izuku circled the ring a few times before shooting to the ground she occupied in a nosedive, slamming down with a fist that created spiderweb-like fissures in the concrete and just barely missing her as she dodged. He refused to let her get away, and before she knew it, his flames had become a bright yellow for the second time in the match, and he blitzed her with a hard tackle before throwing her out of bounds. It wasn't like she could negate his gravity a second time, so he didn't have much to fear by getting in close anymore. Uraraka is out of bounds. Midoriya advances to the next round, Midnight announced, and the crowd exploded. With the other UA staff, Inko gave a round of applause with a beaming grin from her double dose of pride. Not only had Ochako actually pushed Izuku and nearly gotten the better of him, but she forced him to get creative with his offense and not rely on a select few colors like he had been getting into the habit of. Not every opponent that made him work for it would just brute force it like the Namu. Cunning opponents required equal helpings of craft in return. Shinso, meanwhile, was feeling a mixture of relief and indigestion. He was under no illusions that he would have lasted very long against either of them, but it only hardened his resolve to catch up to and surpass Midoriya by any means. Ochako laid on the ground and sighed in disappointment. She was so close, much closer than she really ought to have been, but it ultimately wasn't enough. When she saw her best friend floating overhead, she stood up to cancel her quirk and catch him, and, as expected, he fell onto her and brought her down to the ground with him. Unlike the last time, Izuku was conscious, so she wasn't stuck on the ground until medic bots could lift him off of her. When he did stand up, he offered her a hand to help her to her feet. She looked at it for a second with a minutia of dejection before she shook it off and forced a smile onto her face. Accepting the hand and climbing to her feet, she congratulated Izuku on his win, but he didn't say anything. He only blankly stared at her, but his eyes were assessing every detail of her facade. It clearly wasn't fooling him. She almost yelped when he grabbed her wrist and held up her arm, presenting her to the crowd that began to applaud and cheer for the both of them. But many focused their praise onto her when they realized what the boy was doing. Izuku stepped aside and let the cheers rain down on her, Midnight and Cementos choosing to let them have their moment rather than hurry them along. They had to circle back to Kirishima and Tetsutetsu anyway, so they weren't in any rush. Ochako stood in the arena and could barely process the cheers and praise she was receiving from the crowd. She found the eyes of her classmates, and they were all on their feet to give her a standing ovation. She saw the unmistakable costumes of pro-heroes applauding her as well. It was impossible for her to keep the tears from welling up, but she did her best to not let the dam break. Then Izuku finally spoke. "Soak it in. Win or lose, you damn sure earned this." With that, he walked away to let her bask in the moment, her moment. Her moment where she proved she belonged and could stand alongside him as more than a hindrance. The dam was absolutely demolished. She truly had the best friend anyone could ask for. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through What If Deku Unleashed God-like Quirk That Surpassed All. I hope you found it as intriguing and thought-provoking as we did. A big shout out to DripBayless for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on FanfictionNet for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to What If Deku 2 for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.